She first learned what they called her on a winter evening made bright with 100 candles and none with mercy. The ballroom of Harrowby House shimmered in pale gold, chandeliers trembling with light as if aware of the fragile pride beneath them. Silk skirts whispered secrets along the marble floor. Laughter rose and fell in practiced waves. And among it all stood Miss Eleanor Hawthorne, quiet as snowfall, her gloved hands folded, her posture composed enough to pass for confidence if one did not look closely at her eyes. They did not speak loudly. They never did. Society's sharpest blades were sheathed in politeness. A murmur near the columns, a pause too deliberate, a smile that curved with pity rather than warmth. Eleanor felt it before she understood it, the way one senses cold before the ache reaches bone. Her reflection in the tall mirrors showed a woman neither ugly nor striking. Soft brown hair drawn neatly back, features gentle rather than commanding, a gown of dove gray, silk chosen for modesty rather than display. Plain, they said, as though it were a failing of character. She had come at her aunt's insistence, hopeful in the way only the unseasoned remain hopeful, believing that good manners and sincerity might still count for something. She had danced once, spoken little, listened much. Yet it was listening that wounded her, for it was there, between the rustle of fans and the clink of crystal, that the words reached her. Unfit, a lady murmured lightly, as if tasting a new syllable. Entirely unfit. Another voice, amused. The Duke himself said so, I am told. Quite plainly. The Duke. Even now, the name carried weight enough to hush a room. Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Wetherby, stood at the center of the gathering like an axis, tall and immaculately composed, dark hair neatly kept, expression schooled into distant courtesy. He was not cruel in aspect, nor kind. He belonged to a different climate altogether, where emotion was something observed rather than indulged. Eleanor did not hear his voice repeat the judgment, but the certainty with which it was attributed left no space for doubt. She is unfit to be my wife, he had said, or something close enough to live with. The words settled over her like ash, dull and suffocating. She remained still. That was her triumph, small and private. She did not flinch, nor did she retreat at once. Years of careful endurance had taught her how to survive a moment without granting it the satisfaction of breaking her. She inclined her head politely when addressed. She thanked a gentleman who offered lemonade. She smiled when required. Yet inside, something shifted. A hope loosened its grip and slipped quietly away. She had never expected the Duke's notice, not truly. She knew her place in the invisible order that governed these rooms. But to be named, even in rejection, sharpened the pain. It transformed her from overlooked to assessed, found wanting, and dismissed. That was the cruelty of it, to be seen only long enough to be judged. Across the room, the Duke spoke with practiced ease, his attention divided among ministers' wives and ambitious cousins. If the words had indeed been his, they were spoken without malice, perhaps even without thought. He was a man accustomed to precision in estates and lineage, to choices made with consequence in mind. Suitability was a language he spoke fluently. Eleanor Hawthorne did not fit its grammar. Yet there came a moment, brief, almost accidental, when his gaze shifted. The laughter around him softened, blurred, and his eyes found her standing alone near the window, framed by frost-lace glass. She was not looking at him. She was looking outward, toward the dark gardens where winter had stripped every branch bare. There was no appeal in her posture, no calculated sadness. Only a stillness that suggested she would endure whatever came next. Something unsettled, though he did not name it. He turned away soon after, returning to safer conversations. The moment passed, as moments often do, leaving only its echo. Eleanor took her leave early. Her aunt protested weakly, but did not insist. Outside, the night air was sharp, carrying the scent of snow and iron. The carriage ride home was quiet. She watched the lamps retreat one by one, each glow swallowed by darkness. By the time they reached the narrow house where she lodged, she had already begun the work of folding the evening away, tucking its injuries into places where they would ache less over time. She told herself it was finished. That tomorrow would arrive as it always had, with letters to write, accounts to manage, small kindnesses to offer where they were neither noticed nor required. She told herself that dignity did not depend on being chosen. Yet elsewhere, in a grand house still alive with light, the Duke stood at his study window, staring into a night he did not fully understand. He could not have said why the memory of a woman in gray lingered, nor why the word unfit felt suddenly imprecise. He dismissed the thought as fatigue, unaware that something irrevocable had already begun, quietly, where neither of them yet dared to look. The change did not announce itself with ceremony. It arrived in small, almost invisible disturbances, the sort that unsettled the careful rhythm of society without ever admitting their cause. Within days of the Harrowby ball, Eleanor Hawthorne found her name circulating again, no longer with idle dismissal, but with curiosity sharpened by confusion. It was not kinder, merely altered, as though a familiar object had been moved an inch from its place and now demanded fresh attention. The first sign was a note delivered on thick cream paper, the seal unbroken, the handwriting elegant and unmistakably masculine. It did not ask for her company. It merely returned a book she had once lent to the hostess of the ball, a volume of essays she scarcely remembered relinquishing. The Duke's crest was pressed into the wax. Inside, a single line, restrained to the point of severity, thanked her for the loan and expressed hope that she might find the volume no worse for its temporary absence. There was no signature beyond his name, written as one writes an obligation, not a sentiment. Eleanor read it twice, then folded it carefully. She told herself it meant nothing. Books traveled, courtesies were exchanged, yet the knowledge that his hand had held the same pages unsettled her more than she wished to admit. She placed the book back upon its shelf, though she did not open it. Its presence alone seemed enough. At the next gathering, smaller and less luminous, she noticed the glances begin. They were not unkind, precisely, but they lingered. A space was made for her at a card table where none had existed before. A chair was drawn back by a footman who had previously passed her by. These were not kindnesses freely given. They were reactions, reflexive and alert, as if society had sent it a shift and was leaning closer to inspect it. The Duke arrived late. When he entered, conversation adjusted itself instinctively, tilting in his direction. He greeted his hosts, acknowledged acquaintances, and then, with a decision that seemed almost casual, took a place near the window where Eleanor stood examining a vase of winter roses. He did not speak to her at once. That perhaps was the boldest part. He allowed the silence to exist between them, unembellished, unrescued. "It is colder this evening," he said at last, his tone neutral, as though discussing the state of an estate road. "So it is," she replied, inclining her head. She did not look at him directly. She had learned how dangerous that could be. He remarked upon the roses, their improbable color against the frost. She answered with polite precision. Anyone watching might have assumed the exchange meaningless. Yet the fact of it spread quickly, a spark carried by eyes and whispers. The Duke did not usually concern himself with women who inspired no competition. His attention alone altered the air. Later, when a sudden squall lashed rain against the windows and the guests hesitated, uncertain whether to depart, it was he who instructed a servant to ready his carriage for Miss Hawthorne. He offered it without flourish, his gaze steady, his manner entirely proper. Still, the effect was immediate. Murmurs rose, not loud enough to challenge him, sharp enough to wound her. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before accepting. Refusal would have drawn greater notice. As she stepped into the carriage, the rain darkening her hem, she felt the weight of eyes upon her back. Inside, the cushion smelled faintly of leather and something cleaner, more austere. The Duke did not join her. He merely closed the door himself, a gesture so small it would be forgotten by morning, except by those determined not to forget. By the following week, the kindness had acquired teeth. A lady with whom Eleanor had once shared quiet conversations asked pointedly whether congratulations were in order. Another warned her, with false concern, not to misread politeness as preference. Eleanor endured these remarks with the same composure she had carried all her life, though now it cost her more. Gratitude curdled into anxiety. Each courtesy felt like a step onto unstable ground. The Duke, for his part, found his routines disturbed by a persistent restlessness. He noticed absences. He noticed when Eleanor was not present, and when she was, he found his attention drawn against his will. She did not seek him out. That, too, unsettled him. Women with ambition made sense to him. They could be managed, anticipated. Her restraint resisted classification. When his sister remarked, lightly, that society was enjoying its newest puzzle, he responded with indifference too carefully constructed to be convincing. He told himself his actions were inconsequential, that he had merely corrected an earlier discourtesy. Yet the memory of her standing alone by the window returned unbidden, joined now by the knowledge that his attention had made her more vulnerable, not less. The moment that transformed speculation into scandal came without warning. At a dinner crowded with relations and expectations, a misplaced remark suggested that another match was imminent for him, advantageous and assured. Eleanor heard it and felt the familiar tightening, the instinct to withdraw before the wound could deepen. She rose quietly, intending to leave unnoticed. She did not succeed. The Duke stood as well. His chair scraped the floor, the sound sharp in the sudden hush. He spoke her name aloud, clearly, requesting that she remain. It was not a declaration. It was not even an explanation. Yet it was enough. Enough to still the room. Enough to bind her, for that instant, to his will. Eleanor turned back, her expression composed, her heart unsteady. Around them, society leaned in, breath held, waiting to see which of them would falter first, and neither yet knowing that the balance between shame and hope had begun to tip. The rain began as they left the house, a fine, needling mist that turned the lamps along the street into wavering halos. Conversation from the dinner lingered behind them like an unresolved chord, still vibrating in Eleanor's chest. She walked with measured steps, intent on reaching the waiting carriage without incident, when the Duke's voice halted her, spoken quietly but with unmistakable authority. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, and there was no mistaking the intention this time. "May I speak with you?" She paused beneath the stone archway, the cold seeping through her gloves. For a moment, she considered declining. Every instinct she possessed urged retreat, the preservation of what little dignity remained untouched. Yet avoidance had not saved her thus far. She inclined her head once, granting him the courtesy of attention, if not the comfort of ease. The carriage stood a short distance away, its door open, the driver respectfully occupied with the horses. The Duke gestured toward it, not as an invitation to share, but as shelter from the rain. Inside, the space felt smaller than before, enclosed by the steady percussion of water against the roof. He remained standing until she was seated, a formality that steadied her nerves even as it sharpened her awareness of him. "I did not intend to detain you earlier," he began, his voice lower here, stripped of its public polish. "Circumstances moved more swiftly than I anticipated." "So they often do," Eleanor replied. She kept her gaze level, fixed on a point just beyond his shoulder. Courtesy, she had learned, could be a shield if wielded precisely. He studied her then, not with the distracted observation she had glimpsed before, but with a focus that felt almost intrusive in its care. "You looked as though you meant to leave before you were noticed." "I have found it wise," she said evenly, "to depart when my presence no longer serves the company." The words were not accusatory, yet they struck him with unexpected force. He had expected reproach or appeal. Instead, she offered him a truth shaped by habit, one that spoke of long practice in minimizing oneself. He drew a breath, then chose his words with the deliberation of a man unaccustomed to missteps. "If my conduct has caused you discomfort," he said, "it was not my intention." She turned to him at last. The carriage lamp illuminated her features gently, revealing not fragility, but resolve. "Intent does not always govern effect, Your Grace." Silence settled between them, thickened by the rain. In that pause, something altered. He did not retreat behind rank or reassurance. He nodded once, accepting the correction without protest. It was a small concession, yet it carried weight. "You are right," he said, "and for that, I offer you my apology." The simplicity of it unsettled her more than any elaborate explanation could have. Apologies, she had learned, were rare and often strategic. This one seemed neither. She felt a loosening in her chest, a cautious easing she resisted acknowledging. "I did not seek your attention," she said after a moment, choosing honesty over ease. "Nor do I wish to be the subject of speculation. If you extend courtesies to me, they're taken as promises I cannot afford to believe." His expression shifted, something like regret crossing it. "I have been careless," he admitted. "I am accustomed to my actions being interpreted without consequence to myself. I fail to consider how they might be borne by another." She watched him closely now, noting the absence of defensiveness, the way his hands rested loosely at his sides rather than clasped behind his back. He was listening, not waiting his turn to speak. That, more than his words, altered her perception of him. "There are names," she said softly, "that follow a woman long after they are spoken. Once attached, they are rarely shed." He thought of the word unfit, recalled with a discomfort he had not permitted himself before. He had spoken it once, perhaps in impatience, perhaps in certainty. He had not imagined it traveling beyond a room, taking root. The realization pressed upon him now with unwelcome clarity. "I was wrong," he said, and this time there was no qualifying phrase to blunt the admission. "Not only in my assessment, but in believing myself entitled to make it." Eleanor did not respond at once. She folded her hands in her lap, the fabric of her gown whispering faintly. She had prepared herself for indifference, even for cruelty. She had not prepared for accountability. The sensation left her unsteady, suspended between relief and caution. "You owe me nothing further," she said at last. "Nor do I seek redress. I ask only that you allow me to return to obscurity." The request struck him as a loss, sudden and keen. Obscurity had been her refuge, he understood now, but it had also been a sentence imposed by others. The idea of consigning her back to it, now that he had truly seen her, felt intolerable. "I cannot promise that," he said quietly. Her head lifted, surprise flickering across her composed exterior. "Then you risk doing me harm," she replied, not as a threat but as a fact. The carriage slowed, wheels crunching over gravel as they approached her lodgings. Time pressed in upon them, narrowing the moment. He felt the urge to say more, to explain the shift within him, the growing certainty that his life had been arranged according to principles too shallow to sustain it. Yet he restrained himself. Some truths demanded patience. "I will endeavor," he said instead, "to act with greater care. And I hope, in time, you may believe that my regard is neither careless nor fleeting." She regarded him in silence as the carriage came to a halt. Outside, the rain softened, the night breathing in. She rose, gathering her cloak, her movements precise. Before stepping down, she paused, her hand resting on the door. "Belief," she said gently, "is not granted by intention alone." He watched her ascend the steps, each measured movement an assertion of self-command, until the door closed behind her. In that moment, he recognized the unfamiliar ache of restraint, the knowledge that influence, once exercised, could not be recalled without cost. The awareness lingered, sharp and instructive, as the driver awaited his order in respectful silence. Then she was gone, leaving him seated in the dim interior, the echo of her words settling over him with the quiet certainty that nothing between them would ever again be simple. The night offered no answers, only questions waiting. The weeks that followed moved with deceptive calm, as though the world had agreed to hold its breath. Eleanor returned to her routines with deliberate care, conscious that every appearance now carried weight she had never sought. She attended when obliged, declined when she could, and spoke with the same measured courtesy that had long been her armor. Yet beneath that composure, something restless stirred. The Duke's words, offered without flourish, lingered with unsettling persistence. not as a promise, but as a question she could not silence. Society, however, had no patience for quiet uncertainties. It sharpened its attention, drawing conclusions where none had been given. Invitations arrived bearing her name with a new urgency. Conversations shifted when she entered rooms, pauses blooming like frost where warmth had once been withheld. She felt herself examined from every angle, her past reinterpreted, her present inflated beyond recognition. To be ignored had been lonely. To be speculated upon proved far more exhausting. The Duke did nothing to correct these assumptions, nor did he encourage them. His restraint was notable, even conspicuous. He neither sought her out publicly nor withdrew the courtesies already extended. When they encountered one another, it was with civility unmarred by intimacy, as though both understood the danger of haste. Yet the absence of overt action did not still the undercurrent. If anything, it intensified it. Silence, Eleanor discovered, could be louder than declaration. The decisive moment arrived not with scandal, but with expectation. A gathering was announced at Weatherby House, formal and unavoidable, its purpose thinly veiled beneath the language of duty. Eleanor recognized the significance immediately. Attendance was not a request, it was an instruction. To refuse would be interpreted as confession, to accept as consent to whatever narrative society had already written. She prepared herself with the steadiness of one stepping into cold water, aware that retreat would be impossible once she crossed the threshold. The house received her with restrained splendor. Firelight softened the severity of its lines, gilding the dark wood and casting long shadows along the corridors. She moved through the rooms, conscious of her breathing, of the quiet rustle of her gown, of the way eyes followed without daring to intrude. When she entered the drawing room, conversation slowed, then resumed at a pitch just lower than before. The Duke stood near the hearth, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. They did not speak at once. That, too, was deliberate. The space between them felt charged, filled with all that had been left unsaid. Eleanor took her seat, folding her hands, her gaze steady. She had resolved that whatever occurred, she would not plead, nor would she diminish herself to ease the comfort of others. Dignity, she had learned, was not bestowed. It was claimed. The announcement came as expected. A relative spoke of alliances, of responsibility, of the necessity of choosing wisely for the sake of lineage and estate. Names were alluded to, virtues catalogued with the efficiency of inventory. Eleanor listened without reaction, recognizing the familiar cadence of evaluation. It had been applied to her before, though usually in absence. This time, she was present, and that presence altered the tone, if not the intent. The Duke listened as well. His stillness drew notice. When the moment arrived for assent, for the polite acquiescence that would settle the matter neatly, he did not provide it. Instead, he rose, the movement unhurried yet unmistakable. The room stilled. Even the fire seemed to quiet, its crackle subdued. "I will not proceed as expected," he said, his voice calm, carrying without effort. "Nor will I accept conclusions reached without my consent." A murmur rippled through the gathering, swiftly contained. Eleanor felt the shift as keenly as a change in pressure. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The words alone altered the landscape, opening ground where none had existed. "There are qualities," he continued, "that cannot be assessed at a distance, nor weighed by rumor. I intend to honor those I have observed firsthand." The implication was unmistakable. Heads turned, not toward him, but toward her. Eleanor remained seated, her expression composed, though her pulse quickened. This was the moment she had feared, the public turning that would bind her to a narrative beyond her control. She rose then, interrupting the gaze. "If I may," she said, her voice steady, though it cost her effort. "I would not have my presence used to resolve uncertainties that do not belong to me." The room held its breath. The Duke turned fully toward her, surprise flickering briefly before something like respect settled in its place. She met his gaze without apology, without challenge. She was not rejecting him. She was claiming herself. He inclined his head. "Then allow me to be clear," he said. "My intentions are my own, and they are not born of obligation." The simplicity of the statement struck with unexpected force. Eleanor felt the weight of it settle, not as a chain, but as an acknowledgement. She did not respond. Some truths required time to bear. The gathering dissolved soon after, conversation resuming in careful fragments, alliances recalibrated in murmurs. Eleanor took her leave early, the night air cool against her cheeks. As her carriage pulled away, she allowed herself one breath, deep and unguarded. Behind her, in the great house now quieted, the Duke stood alone, aware that he had crossed a threshold from which there was no dignified retreat. The choice he had made was incomplete, unfinished, and therefore dangerous. Yet as he stared into the fading firelight, he understood with sudden clarity that the greater danger lay not in pursuing her regard, but in relinquishing it now that he had spoken. The decision, once spoken aloud, refused to retreat into abstraction. It followed Eleanor into every quiet hour, pressing upon her with the insistence of unfinished business. She did not mistake the Duke's declaration for a promise, nor did she allow herself the indulgence of hope unearned. Yet something irrevocable had shifted. The world had seen her stand, had heard her speak, and had watched a powerful man alter his course because of it. That knowledge steadied her even as it unsettled her. Days passed before she saw him again. When she did, it was not at a ball or dinner, but in the muted calm of a morning visit arranged with scrupulous propriety. The drawing room was modest, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the air faintly scented with tea. He entered without ceremony, his expression serious, almost solemn. There were no witnesses now, no murmurs to anticipate. Only the truth, waiting. "I would not impose upon you," he began, remaining standing until she indicated otherwise. "But I owe you clarity." She inclined her head, granting him that much. Clarity is preferable to speculation. He accepted the rebuke without flinching. "I spoke carelessly once," he said. "I allowed a judgment to escape me that should never have been formed. Since then, I have learned how words can follow a woman longer than intention. I will not repeat that error." Eleanor studied him, noting the restraint in his posture, the absence of persuasion. He was not asking forgiveness. He was offering accountability. It altered the balance between them more decisively than any grand gesture. "You have been kind," she said after a moment, "but kindness alone does not repair harm." "I do not seek repair through kindness," he replied. "I seek it through choice." The words settled between them, weighted with implication. Choice had been denied her so often that its deliberate invocation startled her. She rose then, crossing to the window, needing distance to think. Outside, bare branches trembled in a pale breeze, their silhouettes stark against the sky. "Choice," she said softly, "is a luxury rarely extended without cost." "I am prepared to pay it," he answered, and for the first time, emotion edged his voice. "Not for reputation, nor for defiance. For honesty." She turned back, meeting his gaze fully. In that moment, she saw not a duke accustomed to command, but a man unsteady on unfamiliar ground, aware that certainty could no longer be borrowed from tradition. The realization stirred something in her chest she had long kept dormant. "I will not be hidden," she said, "nor will I be elevated as a curiosity. If I am to stand beside you, it will be without apology." His expression softened, relief and resolve intertwining. "That is all I would accept." The days that followed unfolded with relentless scrutiny. Whispers sharpened into commentary. Allies declared themselves. Detractors grew bold. The Duke did not shield her from this, nor did he leave her to bear it alone. When she entered rooms, he did not summon attention to her presence, but he remained where she could see him, steady as a fixed point. It was not protection, it was partnership. The final test arrived in the form of an ultimatum, delivered with the authority of tradition. A council convened, expectations reiterated, consequences outlined with careful severity. The message was clear: proceed as anticipated or relinquish advantages long assumed immutable. The Duke listened without interruption, his silence more unnerving than protest. When he spoke, it was with deliberate calm. "I will not choose against my conscience to preserve comfort," he said, "nor will I ask another to endure dismissal so that I might retain approval." Eleanor, seated nearby, felt the weight of the moment press upon her. This was no longer about sentiment. It was consequence laid bare. She rose before anyone could prevent her. "I will not be the cause of irrevocable loss," she said, her voice clear. "If withdrawal preserves your standing, then that is the course I choose." The room stilled. The Duke turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I did not ask you to sacrifice yourself for my sake," he said quietly. "I ask you to stand with me, if you will." The simplicity of the invitation struck deeper than any declaration. She understood then that love, if it was to exist between them, would not be bestowed as rescue or reward. It would be built deliberately in defiance of the easy narratives offered to both of them. "I will stand," she said, and the words felt like a claim long overdue. The fallout was immediate and bracing. Doors closed. Invitations ceased. Privileges recalibrated. Yet alongside the losses came an unexpected quiet, a thinning of noise that revealed what remained when approval was stripped away. In that quieter world, Eleanor found herself breathing more freely than she ever had. Their union was not announced with spectacle. It was acknowledged, then accepted, then gradually understood. Those who had dismissed her recalculated too late. Those who had doubted him discovered that resolve, once chosen, was not easily undone. On the evening they walked together through the gardens of Weatherby, lantern light casting warm pools along the path. Eleanor paused, taking in the stillness. "They will always remember what was said first," she murmured. He took her hand, not as possession but as recognition. "Then let them," he replied. "I will remember what I learned after." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the man who had once dismissed her, but the one who had learned to listen, to choose, and to stand. In that moment, the past loosened its hold. The future, uncertain and demanding, opened before them, not as a promise of ease, but as a shared endeavor, finally, fully claimed.